Hello everybody and most welcome to H670, and I will continue what I started yesterday in 669, and this is the first take on connectivism. The creators of connectivism was two fellows named George Siemens and Stephen Downes, and as I started yesterday, they seem to think that knowledge is a web. And the first thing that came to my mind was the internet. This is a huge web that is incorporating the totality of the world today. And I think we use that as a working model. And after we go through the whole subject, we will notice whether it's correct or not. But I think as a starter thing, it could actually be a bit helpful to get into the whole thing. This is a side from his article, Connectivism and its Theory. Knowledge is the network of connections between people, concepts, and neurons. And it is the idea that learning involves the creation and navigation of networked connections. So it's involving the creation, but also the navigation. Navigation meaning, how do we get around this network? How do we find our way in knowledge? So it looks actually a little bit like space, and it looks like web, the internet web. I don't think that's such a bad model actually when I come to think about it. And here we come to how the whole thing started for me. Well, it wasn't ages ago, it was just yesterday. But this goes to show how things develops quickly. It came from Ian McGilchrist's new book. And he's saying in his new book that there are no things. There are no objects. Instead, there are relationships and patterns. And this goes hand in hand with connectivism, at least to a certain degree. I'll start with a quote from Stephen Downes' book, Knowledge. Knowledge is not an object or objective. It is not discrete. That means it's not separated. It is not a causal agent. Its property is not to cause things. It is emergent, that meaning it's developing out of the network, coming from the network. And it exists only by virtue of a process of recognition. And here comes the interesting part. Here is the different. It's pattern recognition. So if you have the whole web, it looks like this. You will recognize a pattern in this web. And it's the relationship between the things. So we're not only concentrating on the things, but also the relationship between them. And we must remember here, and it's very important, relationships can be a multitude of things. I mentioned a few yesterday, but they are very, very limited, the number I mentioned yesterday. I've been trying to think up new things. My brain hasn't been working today, I almost had a moose accident yesterday, and it has brought some good stuff, but it also brought some bad stuff. And the bad stuff is I don't remember details, but I remember the gestalt, the whole thing, the web. So this actually goes as an example how knowledge works according to Simmons. But as I was saying, the relationship, as I mentioned yesterday, could be taller than, smaller than, bigger than, having the authority over. But when you start thinking about it, it's much more than that. It's actually the whole thinking process is made up of a relationship. And the relationship goes between those things that we normally call objects or things. And they are connected in a whole web of relations, like designations. Movable could be a relation. Which things are movable? For instance, this chandelier is movable, but make it a little bit bigger, and soon it will not be movable. Now this thing, which is bigger, will stand in a different relationship to the whole web. I think this is what he's pointing to. That there is relationship between two things in this world, could be with three things, but there is also a general relationship between the whole of the things, all of them. And that builds something. It's a little bit similar to globalism or holism coming from Julian Barber, but there is a difference here. We are speaking on knowledge, and he is actually pinpointing the different relationship that could be at work here. So let me recap a little bit and expand. Knowledge is not an object. It's not only one point. It's rather a series of flows. You can also imagine this to be a flow system. There is sort of energy coming from the whole system, and in between the nodes. I call these parts nodes instead of objects. It's a process, not a product. And what he means here, this is not stable, it's not static. So when we speak about object, or in the sense that Ian McGilchrist and this chap is talking about things, things are very static, whose meaning is not dependent on the whole web, and it's not changeable either. It's fixed and finished. One could almost say, as something you're going to like, Kalle, you can say that things in normal sense are monosemitic. They only have one meaning. Of course, a chandelier have many meaning, but my point is they are all fixed. If you go to the dictionary, you're going to get fixed notification. Made of silver, taking candles, having these things, I don't know what they call in English, having a stable handle you can hold, and so forth. So, do you see the connection here? With an ordinary word book, you have this word is meaning this, or this knowledge piece is meaning this. You also have the same with things. A sort of definite meaning. And I think this is what they are challenging. They're not sure it is like that. So they propose another thing, another way of going about the whole way. And this is this network. I still call it network. I might change soon. The second, it's not produced in the minds of people, but in the interaction of people. So I don't produce the meaning of this chandelier or this electronic cigarette, but it's in the connection of the whole web of people, in the interaction. Almost sounds like the language game. And here they're really putting their foot down and they say, the idea of acquiring knowledge as a series of truths is obsolete. And that means that the truth of the chandelier is absolute once and for all. Of course, some little things can be changed, but the essence is there. If you look into the dictionary, if you look into the encyclopedia and you look up chandelier, it's more or less definite. It's not going to change. And it's not dependent on the surroundings. It's in itself having this meaning. It's almost like the chandelier has a private language. At its heart, connectivism is the theory or the thesis that knowledge is distributed across a network of connections, and that therefore consists of the ability to construct and traverse those networks. So knowledge itself is more lively here, more alive, and it has abilities that are, I wouldn't say independent of the observer or the people in it, but it has a bit of a life of itself. And it shares with some other modern theories when it comes to neurology and science of cognition. And that's a core proposition that knowledge is not acquired as though it was a thing, like you go and buy a thing. It has more to do with you, the whole person that is you, how you are connected to the big network, how you are responding in the network. It's a sort of play, you could say. Another thing, connectivism denies that knowledge is propositional, that it is the answer to a proposition. That is to say that those theories are cognitivist, in the sense that they depict knowledge and knowing as being grounded in language and logic. Propositional is like asking something. What is a chandelier? Well, look in the dictionary and you get the answer. Propositional can also be the explanation what a chandelier is, what a person is. And I'm thinking of one of my own areas way past in linguistics. I think that the general foundation there is that meaning is contained within language only within language. And usually there is a sort of what they call intention. This is intention with an S, not a T. And that intention means meaning. And I won't go into that, but it's pointing to private language, I realize now. But also logic. There is a logic here, and logic is a bit more firm. It says that one chandelier is bigger than the other one. But logic is outside the whole network in some way, or outside the thing, you can say, in that theory. And they do not agree. They don't say that knowledge is only within language or only within logic. What they want to do is open up the field quite considerably and say that the whole web could actually be the whole world. It's a sort of globalism in the biggest sense. So instead of meaning and definitions being grounded in language and logic, rather it is that knowledge is the theory that thinking or knowing is literally the sets or the set of connections formed by actions and experience, because there's also actions here. We do things with the chandelier, and I was not moving the chandelier, but obviously that's not the main thing you do with chandelier. What you do, you put candles and you lit them. So you see there is an action involved here too, and the chandelier doesn't have much meaning without that action. It could be an object at a museum. Yes, I agree. But don't you think that will be a very unusual use for a chandelier? Yes. So chandelier is its action as well. What do you do with it? And of course, as I mentioned before, it could partly consist of linguistic structures. And logic could be there, but it's so much more. And it's not based on that. When you look at the core and go to the ground, you will not find logic and linguistics. That's their point, both of Stephen Downes and Ian McGilchrist. Hence, in connectivism, there is no real concept of transferring knowledge, making knowledge, or building knowledge. It says this is not really simply explainable. So let me repeat that. That's one of the points that are so different from ordinary thinking. Hence, in connectivism, there is no real concept of transferring knowledge, making knowledge, or building knowledge. Rather, the activities we undertake when we conduct practices, it could be called, in order to learn and growing or developing ourselves, we are interacting in a way that's not singly perspective. All senses get in here. For instance, social things, friendly things, going to the bus. Everything is connected there. Learning is not a procedure made between 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock. It's more expanded and has to do with interactions. There isn't a proper pattern for learning only. It doesn't deny there could be practices that are very regulated, that's quite fine, but it's much more than that. So in some senses, this is not a contradiction to ordinary views on knowledge, but it's the expansion that is important. And what you really can be certain of, there is no propositional knowledge here. There's not a proposition, it's not an answer to a question. it's a bit more than that. And hence the name Connectivism, of course. There is a reason it's called that. So the activities we undertake when we conduct practices in order to learn are more like growing or developing ourselves as well. So we mature in this connection network. We take our place, and the development is very important. And I think I was almost pointing to that the other day, and it's that knowing is an action, it's not passive, and it's something that you need to make stronger, because to making that action stronger is getting more knowledge. And what they say is that this is what we mean by knowledge. It's just that people later, educationists and other people, philosophers, they have come to say there is a special rule for gaining knowledge. And this is sort of limiting the scope of knowledge way too much. And it also produced the idea that knowledge is something firm, static, established. So you can just make your pick up knowledge bits and store them. And you hear there is also a trait of an aspect of traditional representationalism here. Put it into your head. And it's an act of willing. Whereas in this model, you have a power, and that power is getting stronger, almost like you're getting stronger muscularly. And that is knowledge. And it cannot be expressed in proposition, it cannot be put into language, it can be expressed through language, but it cannot be contained within language, expressed like a dictionary or an encyclopedia or a word book. Those are still helpful tools, but that's another thing. But it's not made that way. And it makes some sense because it was knowledge long before definitions. Definitions we have good use for. We'd be lost without them. But that does not mean that knowledge is consisting of them, because that's going to make knowledge weird in their point of view. If we have a network, that would be isolating an object, and then we will actually cut out where knowledge is coming from. And this also led to you don't develop yourself, because that is that development that other people notice as knowledge. It's not that you tell them, I know this and that. It is an holistic experience of you as a person. I think that makes a whole lot of sense, actually. This is a pedagogical theory from the beginning. It's a sort of didactic. But you see here, we can use different strains. We can grab a thing here and grab a thing there. And one thing is challenging our firm foundation. And to do that to a certain extent, that could be very good, because you tend to fixate. I noticed that myself. But it still have traits that are really recognizable for us, I imagine. And this pedagogy would rather seek to describe successful networks, like sub-networks, and identify them by their properties. And they should be diversity, autonomy, openness, and connectivity. So we still have sort of definitions, even though they're not solely language-based or logic-based. But this is a broader sense of saying that maybe a part network is more didactic, easier for learning, it's a better organizing way. Let me give you an example. It could be that we could say that there's a school called the Waldorf School, I imagine, I think I heard that, and we could still say that the Waldorf School is a better connectivity network. It has better solidity, it's more open, therefore I recommend it. Can still do that. The whole language will still work. Actually, it will even work better. That is their point. They say this is how it's always been working. And when we want to know the meaning of the chandelier, that is how we should go about, because knowledge cannot come from some other place. Cannot be a definition in a book. So this is sort of a deconstruction what knowledge is. And of course, the obvious, connectivism is not a representational theory. It does not postulate the existence of physical symbols standing in representational relationship to bits of knowledge or understanding. Indeed, it even denies that there are bits of knowledge or understanding, much less than they can be created, represented, or transferred. This is difficult to understand, but let me give you an example. I think I mentioned him a while ago on one of my lectures, and this is a program in England called QI, which is incredibly funny. And they try to have like a sort of journey within knowledge. And they ask people, like an invited group of 5 or 6 people, I don't know how many they are, to sort of think about different concepts, words, and imagine what those words could mean, or make up a story, something like that. It's an exploration into the words. And it works fantastic as a program. It's half an hour long. It's very funny. And the leader of the group is Stephen Fry, the famous actor. Tall guy, very aristocratic, upper class English. And he often have very funny comments. He's very quick on the mind. But one aspect which doesn't go hand in hand with connectivism and can help you understand what connectivism is, because sometimes it could be good to compare like this. And it's how he goes about to check the things that he presented in the program. And he has a staff to help him, but he also put a lot of work himself. And what he checks is that the things presented in the program are true. True to the extent you can find in all of literature, all of research, and all of human knowledge. He wants to check out the truth. And that's okay, I'd say, so far as this game show goes. It's a bit of a game show as well. But to have that as a device for knowing if something is true, that's a completely different animal. That is something different. And I notice a lot of people think knowledge is like that. Of course, this Stephen Fry has to do his job. People shouldn't be tricked. They shouldn't be right into the television program and say that was wrong. So he has to do it. But to think that all of knowledge is constructed that way is just completely wrong. It's just completely wrong. And there's so many reasons for that. But connectivism is opposing that. Here we can really find a place where there is true opposition. They don't agree on that model. But this is just an example. I have no idea. Well, I do have some idea how Stephen Fry thinks about knowledge as well. He does actually think it works that way. You check things up on the internet, you check in books, and therefore you know something. But I say knowledge is much more complicated than that. For God's sakes, we haven't had dictionary for more than, I don't know, 1,000 years, 2,000 years. How could that be knowledge? It's a sort of knowledge, but very forehand, very separated from this more connected knowledge, where we really have to know, and it has to be embodied in the whole network. So make a big difference here between checking up the facts and having knowledge. They're two different animals. They don't even have anything to do with each other. It could actually be that checking out the facts and you really believe in it as he does, it will put you on the wrong path, send you off in the wrong direction completely, make you lose knowledge. You start thinking that knowledge are these imaginary knowledge bits in your head, and all of a sudden you become representationalist. And that implies a whole lot. It makes you passive. It makes you sit and watch the world. And every time you go back to check the facts about the chandelier, you get more passive in your head. Because knowledge is an action. It's something you develop. And at the same time, you yourself are developing. And that's incredibly important. Because if you don't understand that, you won't have any development, and everybody will know that you don't have knowledge. Because that is the intuitive measure for knowledge, not that you know everything in the word book. I do actually have a friend named Henry, and he's been studying Nationalencyklopedin. NE, that is the biggest encyclopedia here in Sweden, and he tries to learn it by heart. But how many people think he's a learned man? I'd say no one, not thanks to that anyway. Actually, when he proposes the things that stands in the encyclopedia, he just sounds stupid. He's not a stupid man, actually, but he sounds stupid when he says those things. It doesn't come off naturally in any order. So, how does he think? Does he think that knowledge comes from the encyclopedia? Well, it's just a tool. You can have great use of it, but this is not how knowledge is constructed from the beginning. It's a little bit, it's not far off from saying the whole world could come from the encyclopedia, even the things. It was like a demiurge, a creator of the whole world. I have no idea how he could come to that conclusion. It's completely ludicrous. It's completely ludicrous. And it actually destroys the purpose of the encyclopedia as well. So he loses on both ends. Of course, there are some explanations to this. We have the educational system, and maybe you met a teacher who was your teacher who thought it was working that way, and then you were tricked into that thinking as well. But it obviously cannot be. And here is the point that so far I just started to read about this connectivism, so I haven't made an opinion. But in this circumstance, I have to agree 100%. 100%. Well, I don't know how far he went. He wanted to learn the Annie by heart. Well, in another aspect, that's a good thing, but I won't go into that now. But it's not a good thing if you think that is knowledge. So an understanding is a level thing. An understanding is not definite. It doesn't stop anywhere. And the more you develop yourself, the more you get into the network, the more you grow as a person. That is knowledge. One could actually even say that to know that P is something is to be in a certain physical state. You are in that state. As you hear, this is quite different from how we usually think about that. And this, of course, goes in cohort in a complete change of the educational system, that we, instead of being passive, we train our capacities to think, our intelligence, because there's no other way of knowing according to connectivism. You need to develop yourself, and you need to develop your skills to hone those, make those sharper. And you see here is also a big contrast to the present educational system that takes a computer model that is old, is no longer used within computer science, and that is the idea of representation. And it takes its core ideas from the idea that the world is composing of dead things. Dead things that don't have active knowledge, and they are not depending on each other. So this chandelier has, according to the Nationalencyklopedin, the encyclopedia, no connection, because the flower pot you find under F and the chandelier you found under C. What a ludicrous world. Of course they have something to do with each other. There's a web of connections in between them. For instance, they are both decorations in some certain point, even if this one has some practical purpose and this one doesn't. So you see, you can see what a destruction for knowledge it is to think that way, that everything is separated. And of course you yourself become separated in that process, because we definitely need knowledge. We need to educate ourselves, because that is one of the meanings of life, to grow, not to become duller or more non-thinking. Thinking is a process. You train it. You do that every moment. Something you hone, and all of a sudden, education and learning is the same as doing things. And why shouldn't it be? It couldn't be an exception. So the point is, to sum the whole thing up, there are no mental models per se. That is, no systematically constructed rule-based representational systems. And what there is in this connectionist network is not built like a model. This is not a model. It's grown like a plant. It's organic, and it's so much bigger than we usually think. So much bigger. And it's a little bit fragmentation in action, to think about the separatedness of things. Something that infected our educational system for a long time, especially in primary school, where you just throw the things at the student and you encourage them to think everything is separated. So We don't know the system. We will never know. It is a growing thing. Knowledge is something living. It's not something dead. It's alive. It's changing also. And this change is constant in a way. The relation changes constantly. And if I want to represent that, I lose it in the second. I lose it in the second. The same second I try to make it static, I lose it. I lose the knowledge. It's that little time delay that almost could be illustrated as my friend going to the encyclopedia and looking up what does a chandelier mean. That time delay. And it goes for making this knowledge way so cumbersome. Whereas connectivism is flowing, you are flowing, and you are in this process, you have to be more balanced as well. The body comes into it. It wouldn't be possible to know if you were not in balance, because you have always been part of the process. And this process has been going on for millennia, even more so. So it's a huge web. And well, it's starting to grow on me actually. I'll look into it a bit more. If there are any interest, I continue with it. I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant day. Bye.